Today on Context, the images are devastating. British Columbia's farming economy in the central and southern interior is at risk. The rescues have been dramatic. And Mother Nature is also in full force on the East Coast. This spring brought to New Brunswick the worst flooding in its history. As the flood waters are receding, the damage is now heading to the curb and millions of dollars in wreckage is being calculated. Today on Context, what makes people care about Canadian flooding? We'll check in on the stress levels of flood victims, and we'll ask, are our compassion levels receding? How are we doing on caring for our Canadians coping with flooding? I'm Lorna Dueck.
I'm Sheldon Neal.
And I'm Molly Thomas.
And this is Context. Marcus Harvey's house was washed away back in 1973 by the severe flooding that hit his community of Majorville, New Brunswick. He vowed it would never happen to him again. So when the floodgates opened this spring, he stuck it out. And as we find out, it's a good thing he did. And in Grand Forks, BC, Sheldon speaks with Pastor Gabe Warrener on recovery and keeping the faith. And later, the response director for Samaritan's Purse tells about the emotional and spiritual recovery needed to get over natural disasters and shows how you can be part of this. So when disaster strikes, what should you do? We talk with Bill Lawler, a director for the Canadian Red Cross in New Brunswick who's been on the ground since the floods began. First to Molly Thomas now with a report on the devastation the floods are causing for our neighbors in eastern and western Canada.
It's a once-in-a-century flood that has BC homeowners scrambling.
There's 6 feet of water in the basement.
Been here for 57 years and never seen this.
3,000 people out of their southern interior homes, and the snow melt combined with plus 30 temperatures means a second surge is on its way.
We'll do our best.
Several communities have declared local states of emergency. Some people were even trapped and had to be rescued from inside their homes. That water, now murky and contaminated.
There, it just smells like a sewer, like it's...
Don't go in that water.
No, it's brutal.
In Grand Forks, local businesses are trying to protect their properties. But how high should you stack those bags to deal with unprecedented levels of water?
Trying to keep it dry so we can open up eventually, but who knows, this might ruin us and a lot of other people.
3 of the region's rivers have already surpassed 70-year record high water. With sandbags not holding, residents are wondering where to turn next. On the other side of the country, floodwaters have receded, but that means the massive cleanup starts. Structural damage beyond New Brunswickers' worst nightmares, many wondering if their insurance or even federal disaster assistance can cover this.
Everybody had that 1-800 number to Mother Nature, to ask her how long it's going to be, but you can't predict anything. You just have to ride it out.
At its worst, these floods peaked at 8 meters high. Hundreds of people were displaced. Downtown Fredericton looked more like a swimming pool. Highways were completely washed out, and houses and vehicles didn't stand a chance. Now residents will have to inspect damage, file tedious claims, and apply for assistance. The road to recovery will not be a short one.
There are people that live here that have been around for the 1973 flooding. 2006 was bad, 2008 was worse. This is worse.
Right now, the government of New Brunswick estimates there's at least $24 million in damage. But anyone living here knows that, like that water, that number will likely rise. For Context, I'm Molly Thomas.
Marcus Harvey has become somewhat of a spokesperson for the eastern part of the country. So on the phone with us from Majorville, New Brunswick, where his family has lived for over 100 years. Marcus, it's the worst flooding in New Brunswick history. Tell us where you are now.
Well, Friday a couple of weeks ago, my phone started beeping with texts from the wife in the Armuncto Fire Department and a few others saying, it's coming and it's coming quick. So I got home, ended up taking an extra day off work, and bada bing, bada boom, 2.5 weeks later, I'm still here.
And you have an interesting story about protecting your property. Tell us.
Well, it was last Sunday. I was nuzzled into my bed, sleeping like a bug in a rug, and about 10 to 5 in the morning, there was a thud, which woke me from my slumber. And then shortly thereafter, about 60 seconds or so, I noticed a flashlight beam coming up the stairs towards my bedroom, which shouldn't be happening when you're completely isolated on an island in the middle of a disaster area. So I hollered out, hello. A gentleman, well, that's a loose term, a guy yelled, you need to evacuate. And then all I heard was the scattering of rats going out my back door. They didn't see me, though. I jumped up on my pool deck and I heard some splashing in the back end of the house. I looked over my pool deck and I saw 3 guys in a red canoe, feverishly trying to find an extra paddle so they could make their slow speed getaway.
A red canoe, a missing paddle. What a very Canadian chase. But looters, shocking.
Well, I know on our end, it's the sense of community is outstanding. Like when I got the looters in my house and I chased them out, it wasn't them looting me. It was them, metaphorically looting the community. I got a hold of the RCMP, and after that, I called members of the community, local farmers and friends, and it was with them that we banded together our community to catch those guys with the authorities. And the same is with the flood in general here as a community and as Canadians. We've got our guys that are sticking around here. We're taking care of the animals. We're taking care of property. We're watching out for each other. And, I was watching the news today and seeing what's happening out in BC. And, the pictures are eerily very similar to what's happening here on our end. And we definitely have empathy and we know what they're going through and feel for them.
Stay safe out there, Marcus. Wow, what a great community building story. Thank you for sharing that with us. That was New Brunswick farmer Marcus Harvey, who joined us from Majorville, New Brunswick.
Awesome. Thank you for your support, and good luck to everybody out west. We're thinking about you on the east.
Red Cross Director Bill Lawler is on the ground in New Brunswick, where recent floods were declared the worst in that province's history. The Red Cross has registered thousands of evacuees. Bill, thank you for joining us from St. John's. Give us a sense of what's going on there now.
Well, we're kind of entering that recovery phase now where, we're not seeing an increased number of evacuations. Many residents have been able to return home, particularly if they were evacuated more from an isolation perspective, in that we had over 130 roads closed at the peak of the floods throughout the province. So some people were asked and suggested that they voluntarily evacuate in case they required access to emergency services. So people are returning to their homes, and then in some cases, people are just discovering now the extent of the damage and understanding that it could be some time before they go back, if they're able to go back at all. Okay, so let's talk about that worst case scenario. What is being done to help the most vulnerable? So we are working in auxiliary to the provincial and local authorities, and certainly soon after this event began, the provincial government announced their disaster financial assistance program. So that's in place for folks who have suffered some damage to their property or their residence. So it works in concert with the insurance industry and also the nonprofit sector. So we work together to figure out, okay, where are the greatest needs going to be, and what are some of the gaps going to be in the provision of service for folks who are going to require some support. On the insurance industry rather side of things, people are working with their insurance brokers to determine what, if any, part of their loss may have been insurable loss that was covered under their policy. And people are being interviewed and going through the case management right now with the province to determine if they have some eligibility for some of the disaster financial assistance through that provincial government program. And then when the Red Cross steps in, we're able to provide some support on a daily basis to people who are still displaced and help them to navigate through some of these processes. I noticed that you give out $600 for each flooded family. Is that a start, or is that a maximum for a flooded family? Yeah, and there's some inconsistencies across the country on how we do that, and it depends on if there's money made available by provincial governments or through a financial appeal. So a lot of the work that we do on the front end is covered by the provincial governments in certain spots across the country. New Brunswick is one of those places. But we knew the devastation, the damage was going to be great, so we launched a financial appeal to Canadians so that we could provide some extra support to particularly the vulnerable folks who have been either displaced for a number of days. In many cases, there were some power outages directly resulting of the floods. They had to de-energize those homes to keep them safe. So again, it's not necessarily that one cash injection, the same standard amount across the country. It depends on discussions with local authorities and also the success of the financial fundraising appeal.
Okay, so these flood levels are higher than the 2010 ones when Canadians donated $1 million to flood victims. Are we still donating at those levels as Canadians, even though this is a worse flood?
So we have a few different scenarios. We have in New Brunswick, we have the worst flooding in this province's history in at least 70 years, potentially more. And certainly in BC, as you're well familiar, historical flooding occurring out there as well. And what's, I guess, always hard for us to determine is, donors will respond very differently to different events. No two disasters are alike, and no two appeals are alike. It really, so I guess our mandate to do this, and through the help of media such as yourself, is to get the message out to demonstrate what the needs are and how great they can be and how severely and negatively impacted families are as a result of the high waters.
But you're not anywhere near, as of this broadcast, you're not anywhere near the donation levels that came in to help flood victims in 2010. So that's just a reminder to all of us Canadians to help the Red Cross. Okay, Bill Lawler, thank you for helping us understand our neighbors in the East and the West much better in this flood crisis.
Thank you for the opportunity. We appreciate it.
Okay, that's Bill Lawler, the director of the Red Cross in New Brunswick.
Well, Canadians in certain parts of the country are used to flooding, but this year at record levels, it is just too much. Atlaf Arain is here to help us figure out what is going on here. He's a professor at the School of Geography and Earth Sciences at McMaster University. Atlaf, I mean, why is there so much excess water in Canada right now?
I think it was because there was some good excess snowfall this earlier this year, and we had this combination of warmer temperature, where spring coming early with quite warm temperatures, so it's melting at a very rapid rate. So that's contributing into flooding in many parts of Canada. So this has happened in the West, and earlier in the year, this has also happened in Ontario as well. So that's the reason. So we have good snowpack, warmer temperature, and the combination will generate flooding. Early melt and rapid melt will create flooding.
I mean, it seems like every year we're talking about flooding, though. Are you seeing wider weather patterns around more excess flooding than, say, 10 years ago?
Yeah, I think if we look at our pattern, like rainfall and flooding events in Canada, even across the world, then we can see there is a increasing trend where we see this extreme precipitation events where the rainfall can be intense or melt can be early because of the warmer temperature. So our hydrologic cycle is becoming a little bit extreme. The reason is that warmer temperatures, because of the climate change, it means air can hold a lot more water when air can hold at warmer temperatures, and when the rain or snow will happen, we will have a larger events. So we see the trends where extreme precipitation is becoming more frequent and more intense. I mean, the frequency may not be there, but the events itself is becoming more extreme. Right. So we may have dry periods in between very large extreme events. So that kind of trend we are seeing. Yes. So events becoming heavier.
So in light of that, I mean, in the light of thinking that this is climate change and we're seeing more of these events, should people be moving out of flood-prone areas? I mean, we see a lot of New Brunswickers saying this is the last flood I'm going to deal with.
Yeah, I think I would not say that people should be moving out of the floodplain area, because this is a bigger planning issue, why the people are there at first place. I think there can be many measures, short-term and long-term, that can be adopted. Number one, we need in Canada, we need some predictive flood forecasting predictive system where we can predict the flooding event and the precipitation events. That can be one way we can be more prepared. Yeah. We can have some infrastructure guidelines where we can look at our infrastructure, whether those infrastructure can hold extreme precipitation events. Most of our design guidelines are very old, so they need some kind of adjustment for the future climates and future heavy precipitation events. We can provide our people some kind of information, some kind of tools where people can make a decision, informed decision, that if I'm buying a house, is this in the floodplain? What is my risk? And how it will impact me in the future. So that kind of information give people to make a good decision where really they can settle or, and this can also apply to the cities and municipalities that they should look at floodplains more carefully, how much development should be there, and what may be the risk factor for there. For the longer term, for the longer term, yes.
Professor, we'll have to leave it there. We're out of time. Professor Atla Farain, professor at the School of Geography and Earth Sciences at McMaster. We will have to keep planning on this one. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Coming up, pursuing faith in the midst of uncertainty. Sheldon Neal speaks with one pastor from High River who knows what it's like to rebuild after natural disaster, and another in Grand Forks, BC, who's in the throes of Mother Nature right now. And we also speak with Samaritan's Purse. It's not only a physical rebuild, but an emotional and spiritual one. Stay with us.
Flooding is causing havoc and heartache for people in the town of Grand Forks, British Columbia, just east of Vancouver. Many homes there are submerged in water. People are being rescued from their rooftops. It's being called the worst the region has experienced in over 70 years. Pastor Warner described the scene right now in Grand Forks, BC. We've heard the waters are receding in New Brunswick, but still pretty bad there. Set the scene for us.
You can see behind us, we have volunteer bobcat drivers, skid steer drivers, 2 of them. We have this sand that is being trucked in here, and we have volunteers over there that are shoveling sand as fast as they can.
How else would you say is River Valley Community Church trying to be the hands and feet of Jesus to those families who are really being pushed out of their homes in this time?
We're trying to help people as fast as we can, and although our efforts, they just seem so inadequate. We have a queue that's lined up right to the road of trucks. These are all volunteer truck drivers, just guys with pickup trucks who say, you know what, I have a pickup truck. I'm gonna come. You tell me where you want those bags sent to, and we'll drive there. We have our whole community rallying around this, and here's all we've done is we've said, all right, we're here to help. We want to give our community hope. We want to extend care. We want to let people know we're going to do everything that we possibly can to take care of you.
Very briefly, when faced with tragedy, how does someone's faith help to push you through when all seems to be lost? Briefly.
We have communities reaching out to us right now. We have cities reaching out to us. We have this whole province, we have this whole country reaching out to us because that's God. God's grace, and He has so much more available. And so we're going to take hold of all that we possibly can. We're going to step out in even more faith, and faith like this is like wildfire. It's contagious. So many people are stepping out in faith, and so more resources are continually flooding in. And here's what we're believing in faith, that God is going to supply every need. Just like His Word says, He's going to supply every need. We will
Thank you so much.
For nothing.
Thank you so much, Pastor. I want to say that I really want to just commend your fire, your will amongst faced with tragedy, and those around you. Thank you so much for your time with us.
Thank you so much.
That was Pastor Gabe Warner of River Valley Community Church, joining me from Grand Forks, BC. In June 2013, parts of southern Alberta were hit with catastrophic flooding. High River was one of the hardest hit communities. Rebuilding and healing has been underway ever since. Pastor Jason Johnson joins me now from High River. Pastor, the houses we all see behind you were part of that 75% covered during the 2013 flood. Is that correct?
That's right. So not only the houses behind me, but I'm in my own backyard right now. And just for reference, the fence line that you see behind me right now, the floodwaters came about an inch or two above that at its crest. And it took about 48 hours for it to subside enough where you can actually enter into your home safely.
Incredible. And you know what it is to walk through catastrophe at the hands of a flood. When you hear the news of record flooding displacing families in parts of Western Atlantic Canada, what goes to your mind?
Oh, my goodness. I don't know if there's really any calculated thoughts that go through my mind as much as a visceral reaction. Just realizing how much of a lasting imprint that floodwaters like that leave on some. When you see your house devastated, and when you see your communities that you've grown up in or you call home and know as your refuge and security, when that's taken away from you, it leaves you with a lot of raw emotions that will always be there when you see other communities go through it.
Incredible. What does the community of High River look like today, would you say?
Well, what you see right now behind me is a reflection of where it's at. You can see at one point, when the floodwaters came and subsided, we were left with a lot of river silt. I hope you can hear me, as you can hear someone trimming their weeds back there.
Oh, you're coming in loud and clear.
Okay, good. It was left with a lot of mud. It was just a lot of carnage. At one point, all the basements, drywall down to studs, carpet, just a lot of garbage, people having to strip out their basements, was left piled up behind me here in this green space. And now it's recovered very quickly. I guess we're about 5 years this summer since it happened, and there's really not much of trace left. The rebuild was very, very quick, I would say.
Wow.
Very well done.
And Pastor, a big part of this interview that I really wanted to connect with you on is the idea of giving hope. I can see families in parts of Western Atlantic Canada looking at this interview, looking at your house, the houses behind you that were once devastated, and saying they made it through. How does faith play a personal role when tragedy strikes? When you have faith, but you've lost your home, you've lost everything. How do we make that connection?
Well, it's a connection that's really made for you when you make a choice. Faith is really a choice, but when it's all that you have to hold on to, then faith seems to take on a whole new meaning. One of the things that I would say faith-wise is for those of us who follow Christ, for those of us who really embrace his mission, there's a byproduct that catastrophe brings to a community. And one of those byproducts is it really reduces all the classes to being the common human. So there's no, catastrophe is really impartial to whether you are poor or whether you're rich. All the divisions of class, all the divisions of a lot of privacy, a lot of the barriers are gone in a catastrophe. And you see your neighbors, a lot of residents who are just in a vulnerable place and willing to reach out their hand and receive in ways that they wouldn't. And so it's an opportunity for the church. You really get to discover what the strength of Christ is and how it reflects and shows through us during times of crisis in ways we would never see if not for walking through it.
Incredible. Pastor Johnson, thank you so much for joining me and taking the time to share those words. That was Pastor Jason Johnson of the High River Baptist Church, joining us from High River, Alberta. Up next, houses can be rebuilt, but the spiritual and emotional damage natural disasters cause people can be devastating. How do we cope? Brent Davis is a pastor who's been on the scene of many of Mother Nature's wrathful events and tells how we might begin to heal.
Well, how about a road trip to help your Canadian neighbors on the East and the West Coast? That's right, a road trip to get involved in being some of the hard labor required to shovel out your neighbors and give a hug where it's needed most. Samaritan's Purse does exactly that with volunteers like you. They provide physical, emotional, and good old help to relief areas. Thank you very much for joining us, Brent. Tell us what people can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, we're working in New Brunswick, in the Fredericton area. We're set up. We're also we're waiting for the waters to recede in BC before we determine where we're going to respond in BC. But there's a lot of work on either end of the country, and really at the base of it is we're helping people who have been directly impacted by these floods. And if you can imagine your home being inundated by, in some cases, 6-8 feet of water, and all of your lifetime worth of possessions have been contaminated by flood water, can't be saved, and it's just it's a paralyzing thing for folks who have to look at the prospect of removing all of this stuff. So that's where we come alongside families that right are at the front end of this thing.
Okay, so the volunteers that we want to help you recruit, people are going to go in there and it's heavy, hardcore cleanup with Samaritan's Purse. You're not just warm, fuzzy chaplains, although I love it that you do that also. Just tell people who are thinking, well, maybe I can go volunteer in BC or in New Brunswick on flood cleanup. What might people expect if they volunteer with Samaritan's Purse?
Well, first of all, Lorna, anybody can volunteer. If you can do a hard day's worth of gardening, you've got the physical capacity to come out and work. And really, we do everything from removing contents from homes, stripping out carpet, stripping out sheetrock. And when we leave a home, it is cleaned out, it is power washed, it's shop vacked, and it's sanitary. It's not rebuilt yet, but it's safe for the homeowner to go back into their home and begin the rebuild process. And along the way, they're able to share a word of cheer with a homeowner, encourage them, and let them know that they're not forgotten in this process. And how do you get equipped to go? You pay your way, correct? Exactly. So if you want to volunteer, all we ask is that you visit our website at SamaritansPurse.ca. You get yourself to the site, and once you're there, we take care of you. So we'll take care of your accommodations, your food, and all of the safety equipment, training, and supervision you need to do a great job in the field. And how long should a volunteer stay in that crisis zone to help with Samaritan's Purse? Well, typically the ideal is about a week at a time, but certainly we can accommodate longer or shorter than that if that's what folks can give. Okay. Well, Brent from Samaritan's Purse, we thank you so much for challenging Canadians to care. And we're so glad you're there. We saw the beautiful work you did when we covered High River, when we covered Calgary, and now Canadians, we've got to reach coast to coast. Let's do it through the good help of Samaritan's Purse. Get out there, grab a shovel, do some cleanup, give someone a good hug who's lost everything. And for our friends in British Columbia, we're praying for you as you get through that terrible flood season. For New Brunswick, as you work on this historic, worst ever in your history cleanup. Thank God that there's places like Samaritan's Purse and programs like this. Let's reach coast to coast and give everyone a hug. Brent, thank you so much for joining us. Brent Davis, the Response Director with Samaritan's Purse Canada. And go to our website. You'll find the links on how you can get involved with either the Red Cross or with Samaritan's Purse. But let's all do a part of making this Canada the kind of caring nation that we know it can be in our spring flooding season. Let's not get tired of loving each other. That's what makes a great country. Well, for all of us at Context, thank you for joining us. I'm Lorna Dueck, and be sure to follow us on Twitter or Facebook and get involved with flood care coast to coast.